Wyoming Territory, late September of 1873. The wind pulled cold and sharp across the edge of the Sweetwater River, and Vernon Briggs had just buried his last cow. He stood alone in the frostbitten pasture, one hand on the worn brim of his hat, the other clenched at his side, watching the shallow grave he had dug with his own aching hands. The land had been hard on him that year: drought, late summer hail, and now sickness in the herd. He had no wife, no kin nearby, and not much left but a little cabin, 3 acres of stubborn soil, and 2 cracked boots that leaked in the rain. Then came the scream. High, sharp, cut through the wind like a knife. Vernon dropped the shovel and ran. Less than a half-mile from his cabin, near the edge of the woods, he found them, 2 figures crumpled near the banks of the river. A woman, half-conscious, and a small boy clinging to her, his little hands gripping her torn shawl. The woman's face was bruised and blood at her temple had dried into her hair. Her dress was ripped at the sleeve. The boy looked no older than 5. Both were barefoot. Vernon dropped to his knees beside them. "Ma'am? Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, dark, watching, wary. "Please," she whispered, voice rough with pain. "My son. I see him. He's safe. You are too. I promise you," Vernon said, already pulling off his coat. He wrapped the boy in it and scooped the woman into his arms. She tensed but did not resist. The boy followed, sticking close to his mother's side. Vernon carried them both back to the cabin in silence, heart pounding with more than just the shock of it. He did not know yet who she was or what had happened, but he knew she needed help. Inside, he stoked the fire high and laid out blankets. The boy Levi, she said his name was, stayed close to his mother's side, barely speaking. She finally told him her name that night after she had rested and eaten some broth. "Chenoa," she said softly. "Makwa." He nodded. "Vernon Briggs." She looked him in the eye for the first time. There was quiet strength in her gaze, even bruised and weary. "I am Lakota." He nodded again. "You are safe here." She said nothing, only pulled Levi closer and closed her eyes. Vernon did not press her for more. He could see the way her hands shook, the way she flinched when the wind rattled the shutters. Whatever she had come from, it had torn something from her. In the days that followed, she spoke little but slowly began to move about. Vernon gave her space but always made sure there was food on the table, water in the pot, and warmth in the fire. Levi grew less quiet, following Vernon sometimes as he worked the land, asking questions in a soft, curious voice. One morning, a few days later, as Vernon was chopping wood out back, Chenoa stepped outside. "I can help," she said quietly. "You should rest," he replied without looking up. "I have rested enough." He paused, then handed her a smaller axe. She took it without hesitation and began splitting kindling with practiced motions. She was strong, steady. She worked beside him until the sun dipped low, and when they returned inside, Levi was already asleep by the hearth. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the stew pot from him. He met her eyes. "You do not owe me anything." "I do not like owing anyone anything," she replied. He watched her for a long moment. "You are not a debt. You're a person." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, stirring the stew. Later that night, as the fire burned low, Vernon sat across from her while Levi slept between them. He finally said what had been circling in his mind since the day he found them. "What happened to you?" Chenoa's eyes stayed on the flames. "We were traveling west. I was with my cousin's family. We were going to join a Lakota camp near the Wind River. But men came. Not soldiers, just men. They took what they wanted. Burned the wagon. My cousin. She did not survive." Vernon's jaw tightened. "And you?" "I ran. Carried Levi. We hid in the trees until they left. Then we walked. I did not know where we were going. Just away." He swallowed hard. "You would have died out there." She looked at him then. "I know." He reached across the space between them and placed a hand over hers. "You are not alone anymore." Her fingers hesitated, then curled around his. That night, Vernon lay awake long after the fire burned out. He had not planned for any of this. He had nothing left to offer anyone, not even himself. But when he saw Chenoa asleep beside Levi, her hand still close to where his had been, something inside him softened. For the first time in months, maybe longer, he let himself want something. He wanted them to stay. The next morning, Chenoa rose early. She was already outside when Vernon opened the door, feeding the chickens with Levi trailing behind her. "You do not have to work," he said. "I want to," she replied without looking up. He stepped closer. "This land. It is not much." She turned to him, eyes firm. "It is more than we had." Vernon stared at her, at the way the wind caught her hair, at the quiet steadiness in her gaze. There was something in her that reminded him of the land itself, weathered, strong, alive despite everything. He realized then that he was not the one doing the saving. She was saving him too. The frost lifted slowly that morning, leaving the earth damp and dark beneath Vernon's boots. Chenoa was already outside, sleeves rolled, her hands sunk into the stubborn clay by the far fence line. She had started clearing a patch beside the goat pen at dawn, without a word, her face calm but unreadable. Levi chased a moth through the weeds nearby, laughing as it escaped just beyond his reach. Vernon leaned on the post and watched her work. "That spot won't give you much." Chenoa didn't look up. "It will if I make it." He pushed off the post and crossed to her. "I've tried twice. Roots don't take. You didn't try like I will." He crouched beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. "You always this sure about things?" "No," she said, brushing dirt from her fingers. "But I know what I've done before. Where I come from, we make things grow where they shouldn't." He nodded slowly. "What are you planting?" "Not sure yet," she said. "But something that feeds." He didn't ask more. She had a way of speaking that didn't invite questions unless she wanted them. Levi ran up just then, holding a crooked stick like a sword. "Can I help, Mama?" She smiled and took the stick from him, pressing it into the soil. "Start here. Dig a little." "I can dig fast," he said proudly. "I know," she replied, setting his hands right. Vernon stood and stepped back, watching the two of them. The boy's voice rose in bursts of excitement, and Chenoa only nodded or guided his hands once in a while, but her eyes never left him. There was a carefulness in the way she moved around Levi, not fear, exactly, but the kind of attention that came from having had to protect something too hard for too long. Later that day, Vernon hitched the mule and headed toward the rise where the stream cut through the scrub. He hadn't planned to plant again that fall, not after what the hail had done to the last of the beans, but now he found himself considering what seeds he might still have left, what rows could be cleared by hand. When he returned, Chenoa was mending the fence with strips of hide and a wooden peg she'd sharpened with his old knife. The break had been there since June. He'd meant to see to it. "You always fix what isn't yours?" he asked, climbing down from the wagon. "It's ours now," she said simply. He paused, something catching in his chest. "You mean that?" She looked at him then, eyes steady. "You didn't turn us away. That means something where I come from." Vernon set down the bucket he'd carried up from the stream. "You've got more grit than most men I've known." "I had to," she said. "And you keep going, even when there's nothing left to try for." "Maybe I was waiting on something worth trying for," he said, quieter than he meant. She didn't answer right away. The wind moved her hair across her cheek, and she brushed it back slowly. "I'm not someone easy to keep." "Neither am I," he said. That night, she stayed up after Levi fell asleep, sewing beside the firelight. Vernon read from a worn ledger, though the words didn't stick. Her presence filled the room in ways he hadn't expected. Not loud, not demanding. Just there, like the sound of the wind through dry grass, constant, alive. After a while, she set the sewing aside and looked over. "Do you believe people can start again? Not just say it, but truly become different?" He set the ledger down. "I think when you lose everything, you find out what kind of person you are. And if you don't like it, you either change or you don't." She nodded, gazing into the fire. "I used to believe I had to carry every hurt. Now, I think maybe I can let go of some." "Not all of it?" "No," she said. "Some things shape you, but not all of them have to stay sharp." He didn't speak after that. He only watched her hands as they folded the cloth, the gentle press of her fingers smoothing out the creases. Felt like a prayer. The next morning, a small bundle waited on the table, roots, herbs, and a few dried berries. She'd foraged while he'd been away with the mule. "I thought you might be tired of salt and beans," she said, setting a pot to boil. He smiled, the first real one in weeks. "I think I might be." As the sun crested above the hills, Vernon stepped out and looked over the land. It was still hard, still lean, but there was something new in it now. Hope, maybe? Or just the start of something that could grow if they fought for it. By mid-October, the wind shifted. It no longer carried the bitterness of dying summer, but something quieter, like the land settling into itself. The nights came earlier. Chenoa began hanging bundles of juniper and yarrow in the eaves, not for show, but for the way they kept dampness from creeping into the joints. Vernon didn't ask where she'd gathered them. He only noticed how the cabin felt less hollow with their scent in the rafters. One morning, she handed him a strip of buckskin with the edges stitched in a tight, neat border. "For your wrist," she said. "It's swollen from the axe." He looked down at his arm. "How'd you know?" "You favor it when you hitch the mule." He tied it on without a word. The leather was warm from her hands. That afternoon, they traded places, Vernon repairing the roof while Chenoa took the mule cart toward the creek with Levi to gather stones for the garden path. He watched from the ladder as her figure grew smaller, her braid catching light like a coal line. She never asked permission to help. She simply saw what needed doing and did it. When they returned, Levi's pockets were full of smooth river rocks. He emptied them proudly onto the porch. "These ones are for Mama's path." Chenoa crouched beside him, brushing hair from his eyes. "And these," she said, selecting 3, "are for the house." She placed them carefully on the windowsill. Vernon didn't ask why. He only nodded. That night, after Levi had curled beneath his quilt, Vernon stood outside the cabin door, the stars sharp and unblinking above. Chenoa joined him quietly, her arms folded against the cold. "I used to know the stories of the stars," she said. "My grandfather would tell them when snow came. Do you still remember them?" "Some, but they feel farther away now." He looked up with her. "Sometimes I think they've been watching longer than we've been walking." She glanced at him, then back at the sky. "Maybe they remember what we've forgotten." They stood without speaking for a while. The earth smelled of pine and ash. Somewhere nearby, and all called once and then fell silent. Vernon's voice was low. "I never expected any of this. Not you. Not Levi. Not feeling like this again." Chenoa turned toward him. "Like what?" "Like I'm not just passing through." She stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold. "You're not." He reached for her hand, slowly, like it might vanish if he moved too fast. She let him take it. "I don't have much to give," he said. She met his eyes. "You have what matters." They stayed like that until the wind picked up and the cold chased them inside. She didn't pull away when he brushed her fingers near the fire. She only leaned closer, her head resting just beneath his chin, and for the first time in years, Vernon felt something inside him go still, not numb, but at peace. The next day, he found her in the clearing, smoothing earth around the garden bed with the side of her palm. Levi was asleep inside, worn out from hauling buckets. Vernon knelt beside her. "We'll need to build a wall around it," he said. "Come spring, rabbits'll eat everything." "I can weave one from willow," she said. "I'll cut the lengths." He reached for the trowel she'd set down, brushing her wrist as he did. She didn't move away. "Why did you keep going?" he asked. She looked at the ground. "For him. And because I didn't want them to be the last thing I remembered." Vernon nodded. "You're braver than anyone I've known." "It's not bravery," she said. "It's choosing not to give up, even when you want to." He reached over and pushed a stone deeper into the soil. "Then maybe we've both done that." She smiled, not wide, but deep, like something opening that hadn't before. "Maybe that's why we found each other." The sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the field. The garden bed was only half done, the fence not yet built, the cabin still showing where. But there was something rooted now between the earth and the sky, between her hand and his. It wasn't finished, but it had begun. The first hard frost of the season crept in overnight, silvering the garden bed and stiffening the water bucket left beside the door. Vernon rose before light, as he always did, but paused longer than usual in the doorway, watching the pale breath rise from Chenoa and Levi as they slept across the room. Her arm was curled over the boy's side, her face turned toward the wall. He didn't wake them. There was comfort in seeing them still and safe. He saddled the mule and set off toward the eastern ridge where the cottonwoods had started to drop their last leaves. He needed more firewood and had spotted a felled trunk 2 days prior. The ride was quiet and cold, the kind of cold that settled into the bones and made a man remember how close winter could press when there wasn't enough to store. By mid-morning, the sun had cut through some of the chill, and Vernon was knee-deep in bark and sawdust when he heard the rustle of dry grass behind him. Levi wanted to follow, Chenoa said, stepping into view. But I told him the mule trail's too steep. Vernon leaned on the axe handle, pushing his sleeve up his wrist. You didn't have to come. I know, she said, brushing a strand of wind-blown hair from her cheek. But you've been out here since dawn, and I figured you haven't eaten. She handed him a bundle wrapped in cloth, roasted squash, and a heel of cornbread from the night before. He took it with a nod and sat on the log, motioning for her to join him. The wood's good, he said between bites. Dry all the way through. Should see us through December. She studied the trees beyond them, the way the trunks leaned westward as if bracing against something unseen. It's different here. The wind comes from the ground, not the sky. That's the basin, he said. It rolls down from the mountains and twists itself in strange ways. She was quiet for a spell, then asked, Did you always live on this land? No, he said. I came after the war. Thought I'd find something steadier than what I'd left behind. Did you? He looked out toward the slope. No. But I stayed anyway. She pulled her knees up, resting her chin on them. I used to think staying anywhere too long was dangerous, that it made you a target. He turned toward her. You still think that? I don't know anymore. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't push or press, just settled between them like a shared coat. Then she tilted her head, eyes fixed on the scar along his palm. How did that happen? Gunpowder flash, he said. Took it when I was too green to know better. Did you fight? For a while. Then I stopped. Why? Because I started to forget what I was fighting for. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the scar. I carried a knife once. When we were running, I kept it in my boot. I never used it, but I remember the weight. He watched her hand as it dropped back to her lap. You still have it? No. I threw it in the river the morning you found us. He let out a slow breath. That's a kind of choice too. She nodded. I don't want to live expecting violence anymore. Vernon stood and offered her his hand. She took it, rising without a word. They loaded the cutwood in companionable quiet, the rhythm of work settling between them like a familiar song. On the ride back, she rode on the cart's edge, her back straight, her eyes on the horizon. When they reached the cabin, Levi was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket with a pine cone in each hand. I made a trap, he said proudly, to catch the wind. Chenoa crouched and inspected the little structure, sticks balanced over a hollow in the dirt. It might work, she said, brushing dust from his cheek. If you believe hard enough. That night, Vernon repaired the stove's broken hinge, while Chenoa stitched a patch into Levi's trousers. The boy slept early, worn from his own small efforts. Once the fire burned down to coals, Vernon leaned back, arms folded. I was thinking, he said. After the thaw, we could build an addition. Just a lean-to, maybe. Give you 2 more space. Chenoa looked up from the mending. You don't need to do that. I know, he said. But I want to. She set the cloth aside. Then let's build it together. Her voice held no hesitation, no question. Just a quiet certainty that settled deep into him. He reached across and took her hand again, familiar now, the shape of her fingers against his. Not new, but steady. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls. Inside, they held fast. The first snow came slow, drifting down in thin, uncertain flakes that caught in Chenoa's hair as she crouched beside the lean-to frame. Vernon stood across from her, one hand braced on a post, the other holding a length of sawn pine. The addition rose steadily under their hands, 4 walls, low and square, enough for a cot and a shelf, space to breathe without leaving each other. Levi sat on the porch, carving notches into a stick with a stone he'd sharpened himself. His boots barely touched the floorboards. From time to time he looked up, watching them work. "Your boy's clever," Vernon said, adjusting the beam. Chenoa nodded, tightening the twine around the joint. "He listens before he acts." "That's not always true of boys his age." "He's got good reason to." She paused a moment, then tied off the knot. "He doesn't talk about what happened. Not even in sleep. Sometimes I wonder if he locked it away too deep." Vernon ran a hand over the grain of the wood, slow. "Maybe that's how he survives it. Maybe when he's ready it'll come out on its own." She looked at him then, the corner of her mouth soft. "You always speak like someone who's lived more than one lifetime." He didn't answer right away. "Some days I feel like I have." By sundown, the roof was half done and smoke curled from the stovepipe where Levi had stoked the fire on his own. Inside, the warmth spread slow and low, the kind that settled in the floorboards and made the walls creak less. That night, Vernon brought out a tin box from the back shelf. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were a few folded papers, a tarnished coin, and a single photograph, faded and curled at the corners, but still clear. A young man in union blue, standing beside a woman in a plain gingham dress. Chenoa leaned forward. "Your family." "My brother." "And his wife. He died in Tennessee. She passed the winter after." She looked at the photo a long while, then back to him. "You've carried them all this time." "I didn't know what else to do with the hole they left." She touched the edge of the photograph, then set it back gently in the box. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." He closed the lid. "I know." Later, after Levi had fallen asleep with one of the goatskin blankets pulled halfway over his head, Vernon stepped out to check the fence line. Chenoa followed, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her steps quiet in the snow. The moon hung low and full, lighting the frozen pasture in soft gray. The wind had calmed, and the silence was the kind that invited honesty. "I didn't expect to stay here," she said. "When we first arrived, I thought it was only until Levi could walk farther again. I didn't expect you to stay either. But I hoped you would." She turned to him. "What changed?" "You did," he said. "Not by asking anything. Just by being here. By making this place feel like more than something I was trying to keep from falling apart." Chenoa stepped closer. "I've been many things. A daughter. A wife. A woman running. But I've never been someone's home." "You're mine," Vernon said, voice low. He reached for her then, no hesitation, and she met him halfway. Their mouths found each other like roots finding water, slow, certain, necessary. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested lightly against his. "I want to stay," she said. "Not as your guest. Not as someone passing through. But as your wife." His breath caught. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure." They married the following week, standing together in the stillness of the cabin while Levi scattered pine needles across the floor as a kind of blessing. No preacher, no rings, just hands clasped and words said plainly. "I give you what I have," Vernon told her. "And I give you what I am," Chenoa answered. They sealed it with a kiss, simple and steady, while the fire crackled and Levi clapped once, then grinned shy. The lean-to was finished by the solstice. Chenoa moved their bedding into it and hung a small braid of sweetgrass above the door. Levi claimed the corner nearest the stove for his carved stick collection, arranging them by length and smoothness. Days passed into the slow hush of winter. Snow deepened and the land grew quiet. But inside the cabin there was laughter, now small, ordinary sounds that filled the space between the walls. Vernon began carving spoons in the evenings. Chenoa read stories to Levi and Lakota, soft syllables rising with the firelight. Sometimes they all sat in silence, and that too was full, not empty. Come spring, they planted together, Chenoa with her hands steady in the soil, Vernon beside her, clearing stones, and Levi dropping seeds 2 at a time, careful and proud. Nothing was easy. The land still took more than it gave, and the wind still carried dust some days. But the cabin stood sure. The garden grew. And the 3 of them endured, not from stubbornness, but from love. Because in the end, Vernon and Chenoa had found in each other not rescue at all, but return. To a kind of belonging neither had known they'd lost. And they stayed. Together. Always.